In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the front lower control arm on this Ford F-150. Let's get started. Let's remove the wheel. You would want to use a 21mm socket. If your lug nuts are swollen like mine, because underneath the chrome cap it rusted, you would want to use a 22. And remove the wheel. Now with the wheel off from the back side, you can see the caliper that we have to remove. There's also a vacuum hose here for the hub actuator. I'm going to want to pull that off the hub, so let's do that now. If you have to, you can use a screwdriver, a pry bar, to help pry this up and off, just like that. Then with a 10mm socket, remove the retainer bolt for the bracket that holds the brake hose on. Pull this out of the knuckle and set it aside, and unclip the ABS wire from this. Let's also unbolt the ABS wire from the knuckle with an 8mm socket. If it feels like it's going to break, work it back and forth because you don't want this breaking inside the knuckle. I've already done this, but I'm going to spray it again with a bunch of rust penetrant. Hopefully that'll work its way in there and help me loosen this up a little bit easier and without breaking it. There it is. Pull this off. Follow the ABS wire up and unclip it from where it's secured onto the frame. Just like this. Follow it up even more. It's clipped right here next to the control arm. Remove it from this retainer as well. I'm going to follow the ABS sensor all the way up here on the fender liner and unplug it. There's a clip on the back side. Press it and slide it out of its connector. Okay, just pop it out. Oh, there we go. That's why it's not coming out. A lot of times these get pretty full of debris here. Now you can pull the wire down. Now have a bungee cord ready so you can tie the caliper and bracket assembly out of the way. We're taking off the whole thing as a unit. Take this 18mm bolt out, as well as this one down here. Those will take off the caliper bracket off of the knuckle directly. With one off, leave it on a few threads so that you can have the caliper supported while you take off the other one. Now take both off. Pull it off of the rotor. Remove your rotor. If yours is stuck on because of rust, mine's not because it's new. But if it is and you're reusing it, then tap between the lug studs. That should break it free off the hub, but just make sure you don't damage the studs. Now we have to get this cap off that hides the axle nut. So take a screwdriver or a pry bar, tap it in here. There we go. Now you should be able to just pry it off of here. Then take a 13mm socket and let's remove the axle nut. At this point, you want to make sure the axle pushes through, which it does, so that's perfect. Next, I want to unbolt the outer tie rod stud off of the knuckle. To do that, you can use a 21mm socket. Now take a hammer and tap the knuckle right here so the tie rod stud can break free. There we go. Remove the tie rod from the knuckle. Now let's disconnect the upper ball joint from the knuckle also so we can tilt the knuckle forward. Use a 21mm socket. Put the nut back on a few threads to hold the knuckle as you break this free. And just like we did for the tie rod, hit the knuckle right here and it should pop off. There we go. Pry the control arm down, take the nut off, pull this up, and the knuckle will come forward. Now get the knuckle off of that upper ball joint, pull it forward, and there you go. Use a 30mm socket on the nut side and a 27 on the bolt side to hold it. Break this nut free. They're very tight, just as a little disclaimer. Take that off and make sure the bolt spins. If it doesn't, it's most likely seized inside the bushing there. So spray some rust penetrant and try to twist it back and forth. Fortunately for us, this one is not seized. Now with it unbolted, I'm just going to leave it in here so it can hold the control arm for later on when we unbolt it. Now with a 24mm socket, remove the lower ball joint nut. Put it back on just a thread or two so it can hold the knuckle here as it drops down when we break it free. Now with the knuckle unbolted everywhere except for right here, that's why I have this nut on just a few threads so that as we break this free and it drops down, it doesn't go anywhere other than, well, until it hits the nut. So tap right here and it should break free. There we go. If you can, pop the axle out and set it up here. Out of your way, that's one less thing that can prevent you from taking this off. Lift the knuckle up, take the nut off. If you prop it up against the strut up at the top, it'll be a much easier controlled removal. There we go. Set that aside. From underneath the lower control arm, we have to disconnect the sway bar link on the bottom of it. As you can see, ours is very rusty. So I'm going to use some heat and heat this up. I have an induction heater. You can use a torch. Hopefully you don't have to use heat, but if yours looks like this, I highly recommend it because otherwise not much else is gonna help get it off of here. There we go. Now we have to unbolt the control arm off of the frame. It has a bolt going through each side with a nut on the other side of the bolt. So as you can see, bolt head, nut side, bolt head, nut side. We'll hold the nut side with a wrench and remove the bolt this way. It's going to be difficult for me to show you both sides at once. The nut side is a 27. Unfortunately, I don't have a wrench, so I'm going to have to use an adjustable. Hopefully it holds. A lot of times these start to slip. You put a lot of pressure on them, and a 21mm socket on the bolt side. Okay. Do the same over here. Okay. Use a punch these out. And this is why I left the strut bolt in, because it's holding it at this point. Now carefully take this bolt away. The control arm is not held on with anything right now other than the pressure of it being in here and there. It's heavy, so be careful. Wiggle it out, pry it if you need to. And there it is. There's your lower control arm with the ball joint. Now grab your control arm. You're going to want to line it up with the strut and the sway bar link at the same time, just like this. I have my strut bolt ready so I can put this through. Perfect. That's going to hold the control arm for me. I can also put the sway bar link nut on, just temporarily start it. All right, that's on. So now it's held on both of these areas. I can go underneath, raise it up, and put it into the frame. Since I'm here, I might as well put this nut on just to start it, make sure that the bolt doesn't actually fall out. Now let's get the control arm into the frame. Slide it up in here. You may or may not need a rubber mallet to tap it into place. Have your bolts ready. The longer one goes through the front, from the back side out through the front. And then the shorter one goes in the back from the front towards the back. There we go. Now it's secured, well, partially. Let's put the nuts on. The mounting nuts are the same, so it doesn't matter which one goes where, as long as they both thread on smoothly. Now I want to bring these close to being bottomed out, but not fully tightened, because we do need to tighten these at right height, which means we're going to have to put pressure on this control arm, raise it up, then fully torque these bushings. The positioning of this control arm, forwards and backwards, also dictates the alignment. Try to get it as close as possible to how it was. The bolts and the mounting nuts should have made some marks on the frame, so just line that up. Okay, it's a little too tight. Leave it like that. Perfect, there we go. That way it can still move around. All right, let's put some pressure on it. The torque for these is 258 foot-pounds, so I'm going to tighten them up with the air gun. I'm not too worried about over-tightening them at this point. Make sure they're still in position, and tighten these up. On this rear one, you're going to have to use a pry bar. Pry it backwards a little bit. On this Ford one, I can torque the nut side because it's out in the open. On the other one, I'm going to have to torque the bolt side. Okay. Okay. That's tight. With the control arm still supported, let's tighten up the lower strut bolt, which gets torqued to 406 foot-pounds. I do not have a torque wrench that can go that high, so I'm just going to run it down very tight with my air impact. It's pretty tight right there. As long as you know your tool, just make sure it's nice and tight. Release pressure off of your support. From underneath, let's finish putting back the sway bar link mounting nut, 18mm socket. The torque for this is 59 foot-pounds. That's it right there. Bring the knuckle in, have the mounting nut ready for that lower ball joint. .24mm socket, tighten up this lower ball joint nut. The torque for this is 111 foot-pounds. The knuckle is going to want to spin, but eventually it'll bottom out. That's it right there. No cotter pin on this, it's a locking nut. Now we have to do a couple things at the same time. We have to bring the knuckle in, put the axle through, make sure there's still grease on here, which there is for me. And then as the axle goes through, line up the upper ball joint. And once you have it lined up, there we go, press it through, make sure you have the mounting nut ready. Put that on. And the torque for this is 85 foot-pounds. As you turn this, the knuckle is going to want to spin, but as soon as it bottoms out, you'll be able to torque it. Make sure the axle is seated into the hub all the way. Put the axle nut on, and let's tighten it up. The torque for this is only 20 foot-pounds, so once you bottom it out, stop. Because it's so low, I can just hold the hub. There we go. That's torqued right there. Put this cap back on. Make sure it's a snug fit. If not, put some gasket maker, silicone, or grease on there to make it fit. Mine already had some. My hub is new. If yours is not, you'd want to clean it up a little bit on this ridge and this one right here. Just make sure it's a nice flat surface for the rotor to mount on. And then add some anti-seize to the surface. You don't need a lot, but you need enough to coat it to prevent rust from building up in the future. Try to avoid getting it on the lug studs. If you have the brushed kind, that would actually be better because it's a more controlled application. And then take your rotor, slide it over. I'm going to put a lug nut on and bottom it out just by hand so I can hold the rotor on. I don't want it to keep moving around. Plug in the ABS wire, make sure it goes behind this brake line. Gets resecured right over here on the back side. Plug it in, resecure it on the fender liner. Clip it in right here on the brake hose bracket. Put the vacuum hose back for the vacuum actuator. Get your caliper, slide it over. Have one bolt ready, start it in, and then the other bolt. Bottom these out. The torque for these is 136 foot-pounds. Okay, caliper's back on now. While we're here, let's take care of these brackets. Flip the ABS wire back onto the brake hose, and then let's resecure both of these brackets onto the knuckle. This main one for the brake hose had a 10mm headed bolt. And the ABS wire at an 8mm bolt. Let's get the tie rod reconnected. Put the mounting nut back on. The torque for this is 85 foot-pounds. No cotter pin on this, it's a locking nut. Now let's get the wheel back on. Let's get the wheel on. Start on all 6 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and torque them to 150 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Now that you're done, pump up the brakes, take it for a road test, and don't forget to get in alignment.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.